The United States, the most powerful country in the world, owes its very existence to a force that shaped not just nations, but identities, cultures, and entire continents. Colonization. And if you live anywhere in the Western Hemisphere, chances are you wouldn't be here without colonizers. But ask 10 different people about colonization and you may hear 10 different stories. Some see it as a symbol of adventure and civilization. Others view it as a dark chapter of slavery, dispossession, and the near erasure of native populations. To truly understand it, we must go back to the late 1400s, when European ships first began slicing through the oceans in search of new worlds. This was the beginning of what would later be called the Age of Discovery. Driven by ambition, conquest, and the thirst for riches, European explorers set sail across unknown seas. Christopher Columbus and Ferdinand Magellan, names you've all heard in school, became legends. Their voyages led to what we now know as the discovery of North and South America, but for the millions who already lived there, it marked the beginning of colonization. By 1914, the map of the world was almost unrecognisable. Most of the globe had been colonised by Europe at some point. Few escaped, Japan, Korea, and Thailand being among the only nations never brought under European rule. However, colonialism was closely tied to imperialism, the belief that powerful nations had the right to extend their influence and reshape the world in their own image. And yet, when we open many history books, what do we find? A romantic tale of expansion, brave explorers, and progress. The brutal realities are often tucked away, if mentioned at all. They don't talk enough about the resistance, the people who fought back, who refused to be erased. They rarely show the cost of colonization, not in dollars, but in human dignity, in identity, in the pain that still lingers today. And so we ask, what exactly do history books not tell us about colonialism? Because what they leave out is often more powerful than what they include.
Welcome to Unveiled History.
Colonialism, by definition, is control by one power over a dependent area or people. But if we call it what it really was, and in many ways still is, it is a violent takeover. One nation storms into another, claims the land of its own, and plants its people on someone else's soil. Long before the 1400s, ancient empires like Greece, Rome, Egypt, and Phoenicia were already in the business of conquest. They extended their borders, colonizing nearby territories, taking resources and enslaving populations to fuel their power. In ancient Greece, colonies were founded not just for economic gain, but also to ease overpopulation. But even then, rituals were used to justify the taking of land. They'd carry a flame from their homeland's hearth as if to sanctify the violence that would follow. And just like that, new colonies were born, often at the expense of those who already lived there. The Romans, the Egyptians, and the Phoenicians all did it. Rather than looking to share space, they were looking to expand, extract, and own. But the colonialism we still feel today took a different, more global shape in the 15th century, during the Age of Discovery. Though what was being discovered had already been known and inhabited for thousands of years. In 1415, Portuguese forces conquered Ceuta, a city on the North African coast. That moment marked the beginning of an empire that would last until 1999. From there, Madeira, Cape Verde, and other islands were seized. Soon, Spain joined in. In 1492, Christopher Columbus, in search of a shortcut to India, landed not in Asia, but in the Bahamas. His arrival led to the birth of the Spanish Empire and kicked off centuries of brutal expansion. Now it wasn't just Spain and Portugal anymore. England, France, the Netherlands and Germany entered the race, competing to seize territories, often from one another, but more tragically from the indigenous people who lived on that land. These conquests were rarely grand battles. Often it took just a few dozen European men, armed with guns, ships and steel, to intimidate or wipe out local populations. When Columbus arrived, he had just 90 men. By the time he left, 39 of them stayed behind to build the first European settlement in what is now Haiti. And the process would repeat itself again and again across continents. By the 19th century, the eyes of Europe turned to Africa, and what happened next was more of a continental assault. It was called Scramble for Africa, but scramble is too soft a word for what really happened. European nations sliced up Africa like a pie, drawing borders with no regard for tribes, languages, or histories. They erased identities and imposed new systems that dismantled everything indigenous societies had built. Cultural groups were divided, ethnic tensions were seeded, and entire ways of life were deemed primitive and destroyed. In the place of thriving societies, colonizers imposed their own systems, once designed to benefit Europe and exploit everyone else. Perhaps the most brutal regime of all was led by King Leopold II of Belgium in the Congo Free State. Nicknamed the Butcher of Congo, his reign led to the death of an estimated 10 million people through forced labour, mutilation and violence. Because here, on the land now called the United States, colonialism took another form, one even more permanent. The European settlers, who were primarily British, didn't arrive to coexist, they came to take. They wanted the land, not the people. They didn't believe in shared resources or mutual respect. To them, land wasn't sacred, it was property, a thing to be owned, divided and sold, and they didn't leave. Unlike most colonisers who eventually returned to their homelands, European settlers in the US, Canada, Australia and New Zealand stayed. This form of colonisation is called settler colonialism. The goal isn't just to control, it is to replace. Through genocide, assimilation and erasure, settler colonialism aims to replace indigenous populations with settlers, permanently. In this context, the term settler refers to any non-indigenous person living in countries like the United States, Canada, Australia or New Zealand. The settlers who arrived on America's east coast believed in manifest destiny, and that it was their God-given right to take whatever land they wanted. As they expanded westward, they forced indigenous communities into barren reservations, often far from resources, opportunities, or the lands they'd known for generations. In places like Brazil, men known as bandeirantes roamed the forests, not for gold, not for spice, but for people. Native people were hunted, captured and enslaved, forced to work the plantations and mines built by the Portuguese Empire. Across the Atlantic, slavers from Britain, France, Portugal, Spain and beyond engaged in one of the most horrifying trades in history, the Atlantic slave trade. Millions of Central and West Africans were kidnapped, shackled in chains, packed into ships like cargo, and sent across the ocean. They would build the wealth of nations that would later pretend to be beacons of freedom. That's the cruelty of it. Colonisers didn't just take land, they built entire empires on stolen bodies. And ironically, even some former colonies became colonisers themselves. From around 1914 to 1975, many of these colonies would fight to win their freedom back during a global wave of decolonisation, but before that, the world had to endure the rise and peak of the most powerful coloniser of them all, the British Empire. At its height, just after World War I, Britain controlled territories in every time zone on Earth. it became common to say that the sun never sets on the British Empire. But what that really meant was that somewhere, at every hour of the day, someone was living under British rule, often by force and not by choice. European powers claimed they were civilizing indigenous peoples, using religion and culture to justify conquest. The doctrine of discovery gave Christian nations divine permission to seize land and souls, while missionaries often erased native identities in the name of salvation. But resistance was constant. From the 1680 Puebla Rebellion to the 1791 Haitian Revolution, India's uprisings, and the 1896 Ethiopia's victory at Adwa. Still, some defend colonialism, arguing it brought roads, governments, and modernisation. But those views often miss the fact that you can't judge colonialism by what it built without acknowledging what it broke. Yes, railroads were built, but who laid the tracks? Yes, trade routes flourished, but at what human cost? It took a whole lot, and in return, it offered a version of life that often demanded total surrender of identity. And if colonialism is an ongoing process, as many argue, then so too is the fight for indigenous self-determination. Because long after the flags came down, the system stayed up. The borders, the schools, the laws, the languages. It's easy to look away, to say that was a long time ago, but the systems built on stolen land and broken bodies still benefit some, while keeping others trapped in cycles of poverty, displacement, and invisibility.